Good morning, everyone. I hope you guys had an excellent weekend, a little bit of a break off from all of the lessons. Today we're going to dive back into Dante's Inferno. And remember, we're continuing with Canto 5. So Dante has already found himself across the first river of hell, River Acheron, and now he's going to come face to face with our next monstrous creature in hell. So you can go ahead and if you have your textbooks, open up to page 748. And it's very important that whenever we see these previews that we read them, because we're jumping from canto to canto and we're not reading the entirety of the Inferno, we really need to make sure we read these. Okay? Preview. Minos judges each sinner to determine his or her proper place in hell. This level, dark and stormy, is home to the souls of Cleopatra, Helen of Troy, and other illicit lovers. Dante speaks with one of them, Francesca of Ravenna, who tells him how she and her brother-in-law Paolo fell in love. Their torment fills Dante with pity, causing him to faint. So this is going to be where we see ourselves entering at the beginning of Canto 5. And additionally, just as in Canto 3 we had our focus on Charon, now we're going to be focusing on this judge Minos and looking at how he judges sinners and how each sinner then is sent to their respective circle of hell. So we're going to look at the first 35 verses for this canto. You can follow along at page 748 and 749 of your literature textbook. So I descended from first to second circle, which girdles a smaller space and greater pain, which spurs more lamentation. Minos the dreadful snarls at the gate. He examines each one's sin, judging and disposing as he curls his tail. That is, when an ill-begotten soul comes down, it comes before him and confesses all. Minos, great connoisseur of sin, discerns for every spirit its proper place in hell, and wraps himself in his tale with as many turns as levels down that shade will have to dwell. A crowd is always waiting. Here, each one learns his judgment and is assigned a place in hell. They tell, they hear, and down they all are cast. You, who have come to sorrow's hospice, think well, said Minos, who at the sight of me had paused to interrupt his solemn task mid-deed. Beware how you come in and whom you trust. Don't be deceived because the gate is wide. My leader answered, must you too scold this way? His destined path is not for you to impede. Thus is it willed where everything may be because it has been willed. So ask no more. And now I can hear the notes of agony and sad crescendo beginning to reach my ear. Now I am where the noise of lamentation comes at me and blasts of sorrow. I am where all light is mute, with a bellowing like the ocean, turbulent in a storm of warring winds. The hurricane of hell in perpetual motion, sweeping the ravaged spirits as it rends, twists, and torments them. Driven as if to land, they reach the ruin, groaning, tears, laments, and cursing the power of heaven. I learned they suffered here who sinned in carnal things, their reason mastered by desire, suborned. So the first thing that we're going to notice when we come to analyzing these verses is that as we get deeper into hell, not only does the space get tighter or smaller, but the pain that they experience, they being these souls, is greater, exponentially so. So keep this in mind as we continue to read, and we're going to jump from Canto 5 to Canto 34. And I'll give you a brief summary of what happens, but we notice that the pain that they're meant to endure becomes worse the deeper down they go. We're also introduced to Minos, and he is going to be the central character we're looking at today. And we see that he's described as dreadful. So we're beginning to get a picture of hell and its occupants that, again, is not something that should make us feel safe or comfortable. We continue to see that Minos is described not only with monstrous qualities, but also that he is the person, or this creature rather, who judges where each soul will go. So it's his job to discern what they've done in life, and because of what they've done in life, what they deserve then in death. And Minos is important because just as Charon is taken from ancient Greek and Roman mythology, Minos is taken from there as well. So this continues to reflect Dante's love of that particular culture. And Minos was the mythological king of Crete. If anyone is familiar with the story of the Minotaur who's trapped in this maze, and every so often the king has to send children to be sacrificed to the Minotaur. The king who is responsible for doing this is Minos. And while this is mythologically how he is remembered, historically, right, because myths are oftentimes placed or take their bearing in truth, he's thought of as a king who was rather just and honest and who brought prosperity to the island of Crete. So it's going to make sense why then Dante elects him to be the judge of the sinners in death. We see this continuing in this last tercet on this slide, that he doesn't really have to think very hard, Minos, where these people belong based on what they've done, because every soul who comes before him immediately confesses everything that they have ever done. Right? So again, we always want to place ourselves in the shoes of those experiencing the action in this poem. So imagine being forced to confess all of the dark or not so happy things you've ever done in your life. This is what happens every time someone steps before Minos. And here he's described as a connoisseur of sin. And a connoisseur is just someone who has great knowledge and discerning taste on a particular subject, right? You could be a connoisseur of cheeses. You know their history, where they come from, which cheeses are better than others, things like that. But here, rather than being a connoisseur of food, as the word is usually used, here we have a connoisseur of sin, right? So not something pleasant at all. Again, we see that Minos is going to place them exactly where they belong, and he is one who is fit to do this because of his story in life. Coming into our description of Minos, we see that he is described not only as fierce and terrifying, but also as animalistic, and this is going to be continued as we come to our next set of tercets. Also, we see that he is the judge in hell. So all of the sinners who find their way across the river Acheron and who do not belong in that first circle, limbo, they're going to pass before Minos for judgment. Speaking of those sinners, here we're talking about all of those who crossed on that river, who Charon chartered across, who do not belong in the first circle, so they don't belong in limbo, which is reserved for virtuous pagans, or people who have not been baptized. And here they need to pass before they come to arriving at their proper circle. We continue to see this description of Minos as well. We see here that how he passes judgment is rather interesting or strange. We have this description of his long tail, and he will look at the sinner before him, the soul who's condemned to hell, and he, after hearing everything they've done in their life, he decides which of those remaining 8 circles they go to. Remember, the first circle is already passed, and he is going to wrap himself in his tail as many times as the circle they belong in. So, for example, those who are going to find themselves in circle 2, reserved for those who have given in to lust or desire, they will see Minos wrap his tail around himself twice, passing judgment on them. Also, we see that similar to the crowd at the river Acheron, there is a crowd in front of Minos, and they are all waiting to receive their judgment. So we get this understanding, repetitive, that hell is extremely well populated, which is something that should terrify us. We then come to understanding that, one, everyone who passes before Minos is cast down to where they belong. So this lack of hope, once you have found yourself past that gate and past that river, there is no going back. And additionally, we see this place described as sorrow's hospice. And a hospice is usually used to describe a shelter for travelers on the one hand, or a home for those who are sick. So here we see it described as sorrow's hospice. So hell is reserved for people, travelers, who are condemned to a life of lamentation, of sadness. And then we come to this word you, that final verse, and here we see a shift in direction. So Minos is no longer focused on his task. He's focused on Dante, and he speaks to him directly. And you recall, this is the second time this happens to Dante. So it's not a coincidence that the figures who pass judgment in hell, or who are leaders or people of responsibility in hell, are going to look at Dante and understand he doesn't belong there. And he tells him as much, right? He stops at the sight of Dante, he stops what he's doing, and he gives Dante this advice. Beware, be careful. And he tells him to beware of two things. So one, how you come in, meaning be careful how you enter hell. If you're entering hell as a living soul, you don't belong here. But he's cautioning him, at the end of your life, when you do die, beware how you come in. Will you come in through my gate, through the gate of hell? Or will you ascend through the gate of heaven? But he's also telling Dante to beware whom you trust. So as you go through these circles of hell, don't believe everything you're told by these souls. And this is an important warning for Dante the pilgrim, but Dante the poet is also warning us as readers to be cautious as well. Because we're going to see stories, particularly here in Canto 5, where we begin to feel sorrow and sadness and pity for the people we see in hell. And Dante the poet is trying to remind us, hey, wait, don't believe everything they tell you. So again, we see this description of Minos as monstrous, how he physically uses his tail in part to pass judgment. And also, similar to Charon, he is able to discern that Dante doesn't belong in hell, either because of the simple fact that he is alive, he's not dead, or because of this hope we have that Dante really doesn't belong there. When we turn then to the sinners and the punishment they receive, we see that they're deserving of punishment. And this is something that Dante the poet is trying to get across to us. We shouldn't feel pity or sadness for people who end up here, because they are receiving the reward for what they have done in life. It's just this reward happens to not be one that we would want. But we also see that the souls in hell seem to be capable of deception. So as we begin to read, we, just as Dante, need to weigh the words of those we see in hell with caution. Here we continue to see the advice that Minos is giving to Dante. And he begins by telling him, don't be deceived by these souls in hell, because the gate is wide. And this is a reference or an allusion to a verse from the New Testament in the Bible. It's from Matthew chapter 7, verse 13. It says this, "Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide, and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter it are many." And here we see again this reflection of Dante's background. So he is deeply religious, and he would have been fully aware of both the Old Testament and the New Testament in the Bible, and he uses that knowledge and riddles it throughout the Divine Comedy. So it's very important that whenever we study classical literature in particular, that we have this proper understanding of Christianity in the Bible, because many allusions are made to it. And this is one. Here, Minos is telling him it's very, very easy to end up in hell, because the gate to hell is wide. The gate to heaven, however, is narrow. So be careful. And Minos then is confronted by Virgil. Remember, Virgil is always going to stand in and defend Dante. And he calls Minos out and he says, this is the path that Dante is supposed to be on. Why are you trying to impede it or hinder it? And he explains again, similar to what we saw with our friend Charon, right? That Virgil's telling him, you should not impede this journey of ours because it is willed from above. So Virgil is reminding Minos that there is a power supreme over everyone, including those in hell, and that power supreme is God. Then we come to our description of the punishment that is received in this layer of hell. And we see this punishment through the use of sound. So we have this sad crescendo, noise of lamentation, blasts of sorrow. So here we should be bombarded with this image of souls who are constantly wailing as a result of the punishment that they received. As we continue to fill out that table then, we see that Minos is aware of biblical ideas. Yes, Dante, the poet, is the one who places these words in his mouth, but it's important that he places them in Minos in particular, right? So everyone is aware then of divine will, divine justice. We also then shift to sinners and punishment. So we're going to see that we're just hearing right now the result of the punishment they're receiving. So we can only begin to imagine what sort of punishment is being inflicted on them. And I think it's rather interesting too that Dante chooses to use musical terms to get across this idea of agony, right? Because oftentimes when we listen to music, it's something that's uplifting or relaxing, right? But here it's used to describe pain and torment. Then we come to our last set of tercets for this video, and we see that Dante again makes use of simile to describe what kind of hell these people are going through. And here we see this phrase, the hurricane of hell. And remember, Dante is making use of allegory to get across his bigger ideas. And so here we see that the hurricane of hell is simply being used as a symbol for lust and desire, the sin that's going to land all of these people here in the second circle in the first place. And this is going to be ironic, remember, because all of their punishment is a twist of their sin on earth. So just as on earth they were unable to control their flesh, their carnal desires, here in hell they also have no control over their bodies because they're constantly being whipped back and forth. This idea of perpetual motion, they can never stop. And this continues to get worse here in the second tercet. These spirits are ravaged by this hurricane of hell. If you've ever seen the effects of a hurricane or been in one yourself, you'll know that it's intensely terrifying and that it has the capability to move entire buildings. It can lift houses up. So this is not a nice, gentle breeze that Dante's talking about. We also see that part of their punishment is that they curse the power of heaven. So again, they had the opportunity in life to praise God, but now they've made their decision, and the only thing they can do is curse him. And finally, Dante reveals that he understands what these people have done, and he understands that they are in this second circle of hell because they have committed carnal sin. So they let their reason and their logic be abandoned in order to succumb to committing these evil acts, these acts of fleshly desire. So to finish out our worksheet then, no further description of Minos, but we do finally begin to see what these people have done and exactly how they're punished. So we know that they've committed those carnal sins, those sins of lust, and that their punishment is very ironic, right? They had no control over their bodies in life, and so now they're constantly moved and whipped back and forth by this hurricane of hell and death. That's going to finish our video number 8. So video number 9 that I'll post tomorrow will be continuing to go over Canto 5. We'll begin to meet some of those souls who find themselves trapped here. And we'll also continue to work on our worksheets. Thanks for watching, and see you tomorrow.